Well, hello, and a very warm welcome back to the Andrew Eborn Show with me, Andrew Eborn. And who else? Well, I'll tell you who else. It's the wonderful CEO of Supreme Songs, Ellis Rich, who's a titan of the music world, former chair of the PRS, which is the powerhouse which protects over 175,000 songwriters and composers. From battling for royalties in the analog age to navigating the digital revolution, Ellis has seen it all. Today, he's here to tackle a seismic shift rocking the creative industry, the Data Use and Access Bill, which is now under fire in the House of Lords for its stance on AI, copyright, and intellectual property. With 37,000 creators, including Paul McCartney, crying mass copyright theft, an estimate's warning of £64 billion transfer from artists to tech giants by 2028, the stakes could not be higher. Well, let's dive in. Ellis Rich, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Andrew. Good to be here.
It's always good to see you. Now, the data use and access bills have been accused of letting AI firms scrape songs without consent. It's been labelled as mass copyright theft by 37,000 creators, including the likes of Paul McCartney. Does this bill protect the industry you helped build, or is it a free pass for tech to siphon billions from songwriters?
It's the second, unfortunately. And I don't understand why they think it's okay to drive and coach and horses through some very good copyright legislation that stood us in good stead for quite a few years. I was once told that everything you can look at is copyright. Even if it's a glass, it might be copyright. And to think that anyone could just take anything they want, where will it stop? That you won't be able to sort of preserve anything. That's the open door that it's giving.
Yeah, and it is a problem. And we've got the specific amendment from Lord Holmes. He suggests that you need explicit permission before AI uses PRS managed works like lyrics or melodies, which would tackle basically the 64 billion value shift, is what they're saying, from AI firms to AI firms by 2028. From your tenure, is this the fix to stop the bleeding of IP rights, or is it too late when AI has already swallowed decades of music?
Well, I just see AI as the new sampling. It's really no different. And when sampling started, people didn't get permission. And the owners of the copyrights that have been sampled had to notice them, ring them up and said, "Excuse me, but that rhythm is ours." And we would negotiate, and they'd probably end up paying more than they would have done if they'd have got permission first. And that's sort of where it is now. And I won't name the record, but we were actually negotiating regarding a sample that had been used without permission on a record that was number one in the chart last year. So it is crazy. And we did charge them more than we would have done if they'd have asked first. And that has been really a protection. And I don't see an AI use as any different.
Right. Well, you've also got, apart from the actual copyright work, AI can mimic a singer's voice. Um, and
Yes.
uh, and then you've got those sort of issues. So, do you think the data bill ban unlicensed use of a musician's identity, like their vocal signature, as you protected for obviously music rights, or is that losing a fight against the tech tide?
I think that may have already passed because I mean, if we think AI is good now, in 10 years' time, it will be indistinguishable from whatever it has copied. And I'm not sure what we can do, although they do say that there is equipment that can actually compare digitally and to say whether or not it's real or not. So maybe there's still a chance, but this does not help us having that chance.
Yeah, and I think it is interesting. I mean, the industry's been fooled by AI versions. You had the Drake versus the Weekend, which fooled the industry on that sort of basis, and it's already indistinguishable. But as you say, maybe you can get an AI to tell you when it's AI generated.
That's true. But the other thing I really don't understand is why they think it's a good idea. Because to allow the big tech just to take something without paying for it, to me, that means we haven't made any money from it. And I don't understand why anyone thinks it's a good idea.
Yeah. Well, part of the reason is they recognize that the future of all industries is going to be dependent on AI. It's going to make seismic changes across all sorts of industries. But the real question then, I mean, if you get AI which can generate a hit from other people's work, who should get paid? The developer, the songwriter, or both?
I would say both, because if someone has taken the way I look at it now, and this is about sampling, but I just see it as the same. If someone uses a sample of one of my songs and that has created a successful recording, I think obviously I'm entitled to some recompense for the use of my song. But the person that had the idea of using it in a clever, smart way that made it another hit, why should I object? But I want to participate. And it's the non-participation that gives me the problem, not the actual act itself.
Yeah. Well, you've got one of the solutions. We have Errol Musk on the show all the time, Elon's dad. And one
Yeah.
of Elon's well, mothers of his children was the wonderful artist Grimes. Grimes's suggestion was, well, of course, you can use my work, but if you do something with AI and generate it, we'll just share the copyright. Is that a fair solution?
Well, yes, and I mean, there are some Beyonce tracks that legitimately have sampled things like Right Said Fred or Donna Summer, or you would not believe what's been sampled on some records. So a producer will hear something they like, and because the technology now enables them to do it, they will just copy it. And I mean, I've got some songs with 30 writers on them
Yeah,
because
and I
all
think
the
that's
writers
the
have been included.
right. Well, and that's the interesting thing, isn't it, Alice? Because 30 writers is fine, but the way these large language modules work is they scrape the internet for potentially millions of works. And
Yes.
you're already in publishing talking about micro payments. When you're dealing with millions of works, what do you think the solution should be? How do you divvy up the fractions of a penny?
But we're doing that already with if a track gets just one play on Spotify, it's a tiny amount. And musicians and songwriters generally are not doing very well at the moment. For example, in 2023, Spotify announced that what they were going to do was they weren't going to pay a royalty on a song that did not reach 1,000 streams in a year, which sounds reasonable until you also realize that that accounts for about 80% of Spotify's income.
Yeah.
So it really isn't very fair at all to the songwriters that have given so many people so much pleasure in writing great songs.
Yeah, no,
You know,
no, you're absolutely right, and then it all adds up, and people say, "Well, it's pennies," but if somebody else collects those pennies, I think there was a Superman episode, wasn't there? One of the films in Superman say, "Well, I'll collect the pennies when people don't round it up," or something.
yes, yes. I mean, you would be surprised at how many odd uses of songs we are approached for.
So just
But
in terms of the rules, then, I mean, would you
yeah.
treat it like a cover song, or would you rewrite the rules entirely?
There will just be an agreement between all the parties, and I've done one with 8 people. That's the most I've done. But in other occasions, I've picked up 1% of a song because that's all that was left. But nevertheless, 1% can be worth a lot because now, once a record exists, it can appear anywhere in the world. It's completely internationalized the music industry. And why would there not be? We know we can have a smaller number. It's not a problem to have 100,000 writers on there, however ridiculous it is. It can be done, but it's the only way to be fair.
Yeah, it works on that sort of basis. The tech companies would argue that that's going to be impossible if everybody has to opt in at an administrative work on that sort of basis. You either go to the big societies and say, okay, give us a blanket license to do this, and we'll pay you. You work out how to divvy it up. Is that the best way of doing it?
Well, that's what's happening with television and radio. They have a blanket license and they tell the societies what they've played, and the societies divvy up the money. So we're already in that space. I just don't see it as an issue. And the opting in and opting out bit, I think, is entirely irrelevant because if someone wants to use something, they approach the owner. Most societies are online. It's really not difficult to find out who owns something, and you approach them and say, "Can we do this?" And then we negotiate, and it's done. It's not a problem. We've been doing it for as long as sampling has been around.
So if you were negotiating with the tech firms now, what sort of deal would you structure?
Well, first of all, it depends how important it is. I mean, if the thing that if they've looped a rhythm that they like all the way through the record, I think it's pretty important. And that's really the question. And many years ago, I was involved when I was at EMI, and we had a few like this. And I remember what a judge said. And a judge that was deciding about the infringement or not of a piece of music said, could this new piece of music have existed exactly as it is without the previous bit of music existing? And that's such a great sentence because it makes it really clear. And if you've heard something, even if you've replayed it, if it's the same when it doesn't sound like anything else, they need to pay to be included. They use
And I
something
think
called
that's
fine
absolutely,
art as
yeah,
well,
I
which
think that's
is,
absolutely fine with the current models. But as I say, if you, the way these large language models work, they rely on literally millions of works. That's how they do it. So you can say, do
yes.
something in the style of this or do something in the style of that. Practically to work out when the final output, if you like, is dependent on the instructions that you give the machine.
Yes, but in Tennessee, there's a law that has just recently been brought in that says you have to declare your inputs. It's quite simple. You've got to say what you've used to get to the final result.
Right.
And
Okay.
whatever it is, you have to share the money out.
So very interesting sort of proposition. I think the only way that's going to work is with these sort of blanket licenses, and that discussion will happen. The other thing the data use and access bill is doing is something that you and I have been campaigning for. It's interesting to compare the two, which is about open access to NHS records for research and private sector use. Tell me why that's so important to you.
Well, because unfortunately I lost my daughter. Apparently, because her aunt neglected to mention to the rest of the family that she'd had a test for the BRCA gene. And quite a few people knew about the results of that test. The results of the test were that my daughter's aunt was didn't have the gene, and my daughter's herself didn't have the gene, but her mother did, and her mother was my daughter's grandmother. And had we had that knowledge 7 years earlier, 7 years before the time my daughter was diagnosed, then she would still be alive, which is such a crazy issue because it's not about money at all. It's about data.
Yeah, and well, I always say data is the new currency, and to empower medical research to actually save lives. But if you apply the same logic, though, because your proposal there is
Hmm.
that it should be automatically given the consent rather than have to ask for it, because the circumstances in your particular case, and I'm sure with many others, is that somebody wouldn't voluntarily have opted in. Is that fair?
Even though they are asked to do so and recommended to do so by the medical profession, in America, I believe they've got around this by having a website called KinTalk, where you can go onto the website and just mention the family name without naming the individual properly, just to make that so if someone presents themselves looking whether or not they've got those genes, they can just check. We're not talking about actually identifying the individual, we're just talking about the presence in a family. And that would have been all that would have been needed to save my daughter. And it is just a ridiculous thing that something that could save so many lives is not being done, and they're not even finding a way of doing it.
So how would you balance? The thing they always argue about, and you and I have been campaigning for this for a long time. People always say it's about the right to privacy, and people are very concerned. I always say trust comes in on foot but leaves on horseback. And the thing about privacy, that you have terrible examples of computer programs going down. You had the post office scandal. You had all sorts of other scandals. What would you say to those people who are concerned about that privacy and access to that material?
Well, the real question is, how do you balance privacy against the right to life? And that is the conflict within the Human Rights Act. And it is ridiculous because I would have thought that life just about beats privacy. And why, if someone's going to see a doctor about an issue that's so dangerous, and it's not just about breast cancer, there's Huntington's disease, there are other illnesses that are highly hereditary. And it seems that for very little money, we could improve the survival chances of people with these issues.
Yeah, and I think that's the important thing, isn't it? But it's going back though, isn't it? So from the songwriter's point of view, though the people own the copyright in their works, you're saying go back to them. People would argue that they own the data and therefore it shouldn't be an automatic right. How do you address that concern?
I don't think it's quite the same because if you're using someone else's work, you're entitled to pay them for it. I think it's that simple. Because if you're using someone else's work to have to make some money yourself, which you may not have made had you not used that other person's work, that's just theft in no other way. So you're entitled to pay to use something. And in the rest of the of life, you pay for everything you use, even if it's a pot of paint.
Yes.
You pay for it to use it. So I don't have an issue. I don't care about the opt-in and opt-in out. If there's something you want to use, you go to the owner and say, "Can I use this? Yes or no? And if so, how much?" And it's very easy, and it's happening all the time now. And I would say that maybe a third or a half of the records that are in the charts have got some little things in there that they haven't mentioned. But I just think it's what is being suggested is just ridiculous because the whole concept that it attract money here, it will attract money, it will just attract the tech companies to come here to steal our money. I don't understand why they think we it would produce income in England. It would have the reverse effect.
Yeah, and I think
And
that's the important thing. I mean, AI it's revolutionizing every business. We've seen
of
seismic
course.
advances in medicine and so on and so forth. How do you think AI is being used in the creative industries? Is it being used in a positive way, or do you think that creators are effectively being replaced?
Um, I don't, well, call me old-fashioned. I have yet to hear an AI song that sounds as good as one written by a brilliant songwriter.
Well, were you fooled
And
by the AI collaboration with Drake and The Weeknd?
um, Well, I didn't mind it. You see, I don't mind it. I just see it as another instrument, a bit like I see a singer as another instrument. I think anything that contributes to a sound that is pleasant to hear and you end up wanting to go and buy or download it or stream it, fine. But everyone's got to get their share of the spoils. I don't have an issue with it. It's just like sampling. That's all it is. It's nothing new. So we don't need anything new to deal with it.
Yeah, and I think that that's the best way of sort of looking at it. As you say, you work out the finance, follow the money, make sure it's fair and equitable. But if it's your property, you have the right to dictate how that property is being used. And it's rather like if you say, if you have your house, you don't have to put up a sign to a burglar saying, "Well, you're entitled to help yourself to anything unless I say, don't take the telly, don't take grandma's china, don't take this."
Yeah, that's okay. But I must tell you, I love sampling. If someone comes along and says to me they want to sample one of my songs, fine. All of a sudden, I'm getting some money on a song that maybe wasn't a hit for 30 years ago. I mean, right said Fred, when was that a hit? But nevertheless, that's now made money for the two writers. So that no one's, why would they object? They only object if they hear it in a record and they're not getting compensated for it.
Yeah,
That would is what this would create.
yeah, and I had Mike Batt on the show discussing this very issue, and he was talking about how one of his songs was sampled, and they, well, it was not sampled, it was taken. They took it to a musicologist at that side. It was somebody called George Martin, whoever he might be, but he said, yeah, he said it was so similar. That they should pay you, and they settled. He said he had enough money to effectively buy two houses in Hampstead.
Absolutely, absolutely. And there are some enormous ones. I mean, there was a Britney Spears record that used just an Indian orchestral sound behind it, and they didn't clear it. They probably thought no one would know. But of course, then it was number one, and there was a huge amount of money had to be paid out. So it's actually very silly to use it. And the other thing, of course, is that whatever that happens in this country could not affect another country. So if there was a song that was, say, a US song, even if they managed to get it without asking in the UK, I think they'd find themselves in court in America. So the whole thing is a pointless exercise. It cannot even work. So let alone there'll just be loads of court cases. It's just, and there's a backlog in courts right now. I don't think we need that.
Well, I think you're absolutely right on that. But that's what I say. That's why the bill is trying to get that sort of clarity regarding it. Politicians be watching this. They've been listening to the debate. We've had, as I say, a number of great songwriters on here already, and various others in the industry saying why it's so important that we recognise these rights. What advice would you give to the politicians? Because you said in your article published in the Times that you've explained it many times to them, but they don't understand. What don't they understand?
They don't understand that we're already dealing with exactly these issues, and AI is no different to sampling. It's the same. The only thing that's different is the way it's done, the fact that it's done in a much better way. But that's about all. It's the same thing. It's using a bit of someone else's song. So what? Pay for it.
Well, it
Not a
sounds
problem.
fairly simple. And is there anybody in the industry who's arguing that's contrary to that? Virtually everybody that I've spoken to has said, no, it must always be the right of the creator to determine what happens to their work. Is there anybody you know who's trying to argue the contrary?
Well, no, not that I know. And a song is a very personal thing to a songwriter. I mean, some of the best songs are written by a comparatively small number of people that continually write great songs again and again. And when I was chairman of PRS, I would always say the song is everything. You can have the best singer in the world, the biggest orchestra, the best production. If the song is not great, you don't have a hit. And everything has to have a hook, whatever it is, whether it's a dance record, even if it's classical. Rachmaninoff has got hooks in it. Everything has got a hook in it. And maybe you don't call it a hook anymore, but that is what it is. That is the difference. That's why some records are hits and some are not. And I've been in studios with producers saying, this is great, this is wonderful. And I'm thinking, no, it isn't. But I won't say anything.
Do you think you can always spot a hit? Have there ever been any surprise in your career where you thought, oh, that's never going to work, and all of a sudden it's the biggest hit around?
I've got a reasonable track record, and but I tend to be. The trouble is sometimes I might like something and misconstrue that as meaning it's a hit, so it doesn't always work. But I mean, for example, Simon Cowell doesn't talk about his dog record very much, but that was a hit.
Tell us about his dog record for those who don't know.
So, well, you want the long story or the short story?
Which the shaggy dog story, you can do either.
So there was a recording artist called Harry Thuman who's unfortunately dead now, and he had a big dance hit called Underwater, and he bought something the very first synthesizer, and it used tapes for samples. And Simon went to have a weekend with him in Munich, and he brought out this tape of a dog bark, and Simon and Harry wrote this dog bark song. And we took it back. In fact, this is such a lovely story that isn't in the public domain. Brought it back and put it out as a record through Sony. And I took the record to Radio 1 and they said, "You got to be joking." And we never mentioned Simon. There was a picture of a dog. Leave us alone. And about 2 weeks later, I walk into my office and my secretary says, "Ellis, can you ring Radio 1 straight away?" I said, "Sure. Why? Why?" He said, "Because they want to speak to you before 10:30." And it's like 10 past 10. So I'll ring back. He said, "Was it you that bought this dog record round about 2 weeks ago?" I said, "Yes, yes." He said, "Can we have two boxes in 40 minutes?" I said, "Why?" He said, it's going on the playlist. I said, "Why?" And he said, "Have you seen The Sun?" I said, "What, the paper?" He said, "Yes." I said, "No." So I suggest you get one. I go and get a copy. And this is the most bizarre story, is that um, Lenny Henry at the time had a Radio 1 roadshow and they would go around the country and he was doing it in Bournemouth. And I had rung up the producer and said, I've got this dog record. You think, why doesn't Lenny play it and say he's going to play it for all the dogs in the area? And people can bring the dogs along because it's all live. And the producer rang me back. I won't name him, don't want to embarrass him. And he said, "This is so ridiculous." He didn't actually say that. He said, "This is so ridiculous, we're going to do it." So in Bournemouth at 10 o'clock, Lenny comes on and says, at 10:30, we're going to play a record for all the dogs in the area. So if you've got your dog, bring your dog along. So we didn't get a Bournemouth. We put the radio on and Lenny says it, and at 10:30 he plays the record. For a moment, you just hear the record playing, which is just a dog bark with a tune. And then some dogs start barking, and then some dogs start howling, loads of them. And we thought this was really funny, thought no more of it. There's a little old lady in Norwich with a radio on a glass table, and this record comes on. And her dog, when the howling starts, goes absolutely crazy, knocks the radio off, smashes the glass table, and for some reason she rings her local paper to complain about Radio 1 playing this record. And for some reason it gets on the news wires, which is how Radio 1 found out about the record. And we then had to have an outfit made. It was actually made for me, but I was too fat to put it on. So Simon had to wear it. And there's loads of it. He did kids shows, and it's so obviously Simon. You can hear him talking. It is Simon, and it is the most hysterical thing.
Brilliant.
And then last bit of the same story was that we got Top of the Pops with it the same week as Captain Sensible had a hit with Happy Talk,
Ah, yes,
and
happy, happy talk, absolutely.
the BBC had made a little bone for Simon to hold, and Captain Sensible, Raymond Burns is his real name, got a bit drunk because he was so excited because the record had gone from 33 to 1, and he fell on the bone and broke it in half. So when you see Top of the Pops, you can see the hand over the crack in the bone. So this story's got so many stories attached to it. It'll all
Brilliant.
be in my book.
Oh, we love it. When's the book coming out?
I'm talking to publishers at the moment, but it's full of stories.
Oh, fantastic stuff. And why doesn't Simon talk about those particular stories?
Well, I just don't think that the dog record does his reputation a lot.
He was the lead in Lassie, is
Even,
that what you're saying? It should be good.
even the sleeve notes were great. What's his pet hate? Cat Stevens. I
Ah,
mean, there were all these kind of things, and best band, the Corgis. I mean, there was lots of things. It was all very funny, and it was a hit. So,
yeah.
you know.
I think that's the thing, isn't it? And it's some of those quirky ones that basically, as you say, they get a bit of publicity behind them and they do go crazy. It was interesting. Mike Batt was talking about his 1 minute of silence and how that became a glorious copyright case. You remember that
Yes,
one?
yes, yeah,
So it is
yeah.
those sort of quirky things. Ellis, what's next for you? You got your book coming up?
Got the book coming up. We've got a lot of songs that we look after, and just had Alicia Keys cut one of our songs. We've got just a lot of activity going on, and I've never done anything else, so it's just as well that it's still going, really.
So you think the music industry is in good shape for the future?
Well, I think what's really changed is that obviously there's a network of collection societies around the world, but there are some countries where there isn't a collection society, and that was largely uncharted territory for us. But what's changed is if you're listening to Spotify in Madagascar, say, the money is in Spotify's bank account. So you don't need a collection society. I've had some money from Madagascar, which is why I quoted that. But so this was whole areas where we were never receiving money before. And I think the fact that anyone anywhere in the world can upload and download music is going to mean different styles of music going all across the world. I think that's why I said before it's internationalized music. I think it's wonderful. So from that point of view, I think it's a really good thing.
Yeah,
You know.
and certainly the power has now gone to creators. It's a creator economy, isn't it? When people doing their own channels effectively to creating their music in their bedroom and getting out and that sort of stuff. Are record companies still going to be needed? Are publishing companies still going to be needed in the future?
Um, well, I think from the publishing point of view, I would say this, wouldn't I? But it's so technical now, and there's so much data. I mean, millions of royalty lines. Sometimes they've only got 2p on them. It is a horrible job for a writer to be doing that. They wouldn't have the computer sort of heft to do it. One of the things I always like doing, when you get a choice about how much information you let go on a statement, but I know that a writer always wants to know what radio station was it or what country was it. They love stuff like this. So, that's just I guess I think from but if the record companies, I think it's harder now because you can do so much of it yourself, and now vinyl's coming back as well. So I think the industry will be around for a long, long time. Without music, you try watching something on television without any music in it, it just doesn't sound the same.
I
Yeah.
know the soundtrack to our lives, absolutely. And AI can't replace necessarily a human interaction and human emotion, however much it tries.
Yeah, I don't mind AI adding. Let's have a few more hits that wouldn't have been hits without AI. Absolutely fine.
Yeah. No, it is interesting. I mean, there was a research done in the University of California, San Diego, which did actually say on the human emotion side that chatting to Chat GPT was more effective and empathetic than chatting to your GP because it had more time, more information, and so on and so forth. So it is faking this human emotion.
Yeah, and their letters are very good. You just throw a load of information at it. It does a much better job probably than I could have done and much quicker.
Yeah, it's
A
going to be
bit
very
fright,
interesting. Well, we're
a
going to
bit fright.
follow the development. I think it is important that we get voices calling out about the practical effects of the bill and what it actually means in practice. But for now, Ellis Rich, thank you very much for joining me.
Adrian, great to talk to you.
Take
Cheers.
care.
Bye bye.